Hey, what's up guys? Tim Bratz here. Listen, this question came up twice in the past couple of days. One from a young 18-year-old kid finding deals, wanting to get involved in real estate, bringing a deal to somebody else who's going to handle the entire thing, and he asked if finding the deal is worth 30% ownership in perpetuity. 30% of cash flows, 30% of the equity, all that stuff. I got another question from a buddy of mine who's been in real estate for a long time on the residential side. One of his coaching students brought him a deal and said, hey, let me just find the deal. You raise all the money, you sign on the loan, and you can get 5% of the deal for raising all the money, signing on the loan, and then being responsible for asset management. And this guy sourced the deal, is going to oversee the renovations, wants 95% of the deal. Both of them came to me with the question, what is a fair split for the work that's being done and the contribution and the value being provided by all the different parties? I'm going to go over that with you in this video. All right, there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, right? There's a lot of different ways to carve up a deal. There's a lot of different variables that come into play based on how good of a deal it is, what type of syndication is it, who are the players, who are the partners, what are the expectations set. And I'm gonna go over kind of how we look at any given deal and how we break it down, so that way you have a little bit of an idea in your head of how to carve up a partnership if you get into a commercial real estate project yourself. So when I look at any given deal, I look at essentially two main portions of that deal. One is the work. All the things that happen to do with finding the deal, overseeing renovations on the deal, all the due diligence on the deal, project management, asset management, property management, being a boots on the ground partner, all those different things come with the work portion. And then there's the money. Who raised the money? Who's actually putting the money up? Who's signing on the loan? Who's managing the capital long term as those investors are in place? There's a lot of different variables on both sides of the coin, and I think you have to understand where the market is as well. Right now, the money's worth a little bit less than the deals, right? It's harder to find deals than it is to find money right now. However, 10 years ago, it was a lot harder to find money than it was to find deals. So I would say that each portion is worth about 50% of any given deal, depending on the ebbs and flows of the market. Now let's dive into the work. So if the work is worth 50% of a project, let's look at the different variables. One, who sourced the deal, right? If somebody sources a single family deal and they bring it to a business partner and say, hey, let me find the deal, you do the work, and somebody else brings the money, and we split it all up, either 50-50 or in thirds or whatever that looks like. That makes sense for a single family deal, because a single family deal is like a snapshot in time. Meaning there's one time for about 3 to 6 months that you own that project. It's very easy to quantify what the value is for everybody over that 3 to 6 month timeline as they're giving effort during that timeline. But in commercial real estate, it's a little bit different. If you source a deal, it might take you 30, 60, 90 days to find a deal. You're getting equity for something that you might own for the next 30 years. There's a lot of scale in doing something one time for a finite amount of time and still owning it for long term. Whereas, you take a look at asset management. Asset management is an effort that's through the entire life cycle of owning that asset, of owning that property. So it's like, how do you balance out the amount of effort that goes in and the amount of time and commitment that goes into each one of these portions? So when I think about the work, I'm thinking about sourcing the deal. I'm thinking about boots on the ground, kind of accountability partner. I'm thinking about the project management, and I'm thinking about asset management. Those are the four main things that I'm thinking about when I look at the work. So let's hit on each one of those. The first one being who sourced the deal. There's different portions of this, right? Did you just get a deal through some daisy chain and then forward the email on to somebody else who's going to buy it? Or did you find a deal? Did you underwrite the deal? Did you go and inspect the deal? Did you put up earnest money? Did you actually contract it? Did you bring contractors through? Did you get a scope of work? Did you put bids together? Where are you in that whole process? I would argue that there's a lot more equity to be earned if you did the latter portion versus just forwarding an email, right? I think that's pretty reasonable, and everybody would agree to that. So what can you expect for that? I would say sourcing the deal is worth anywhere from 1 to 5% of the overall ownership in the entity. And again, it also depends on how good of a deal is it. Is it a base hit? If it's a base hit, it's not worth as much as a home run, right? So balancing all that stuff out and trying to weigh it all out and figure out what is it worth, it all comes into play. I think, an acquisition fee is kind of similar to what a commission would be to a real estate broker who would broker that deal. So if you just found the deal, underwrote it, and then handed it off to somebody else, probably worth 1 to 3%, depending on the size of the deal, how good of a deal it is, and how much work is actually put in by that person. If it's a home run, you did a little bit more due diligence and put in a little bit more effort in that process, then maybe it's worth 5, maybe even up to 10% if it's a real home run. So that's kind of what you can expect if you're a deal finder and sourcing the opportunity. Might not seem like a lot, but if you're talking about a $40 million deal and you have 3% of that, and it gets paid down over time and the property appreciates over time, and it's worth all of a sudden $60 million or $70 million, and you own it free and clear, that 3% ownership is almost $2 million. So that $2 million is essentially what you got paid on that deal in equity, plus depreciation, plus cash flows, plus refi proceeds, or anything else that could have came from it. Pretty good deal for finding a deal one time and doing about 30 to 90 days worth of work. So when you start formulating it in that mindset, it makes sense. Another part is the boots on the ground, right? Who's going to go in there and when the contractor's not doing their job, kick the table and say, hey, what's going on? Or fire the contractor, bring on a new contractor. This could be the same person who's project managing the property as well. But boots on the ground partner is more the accountability partner to make sure that project management's getting done, property management's getting done, somebody to meet with the insurance company if there's a claim, somebody to meet with the lender inspector if there's something that goes on, somebody who meets with the appraiser, like meets with people and can be boots on the ground accountability to continue to keep their eyes on the property for the next life of the ownership, right? So for the next 10, 20, 30 years, for as long as you own the property. That's boots on the ground. Third is project management, right? Who's going to be working for the next 6 to 24 months overseeing the project management? This can weigh out, right? I typically carve up about 5 to 15% for boots on the ground. It's not a big effort, but it's over a long time. Project management is more of an effort, but over a shorter amount of time. And I do about 5 to 15% for project management as well. And so if somebody's overseeing project management, depends on how big of a project it is. You know, if it's ground up construction or a really heavy value add, a lot of work's going into it, then obviously that's worth more than buying something that's closer to being turnkey. So you're kind of weighing out those options, right? And something else to say is like, you can wear multiple hats. So the person who found the deal can also be the accountability partner, the boots on the ground partner. And if they're capable of overseeing renovations and project management, then they can wear that hat too. Realizing, you know, we have a fiduciary duty to our investors to make sure that we're putting the right person, the best person in place to oversee a $2 million renovation. If somebody's never renovated, you know, over a $50,000 renovation, we can't really put them in place of it and in charge of a $2 million renovation, because that wouldn't be doing the right thing for the investors. So we'll just realize that even though, you know, this person might want to oversee the renovations and the project management, they might not be qualified to do that. Then there's the asset management, right? Asset management is really like the buck stops here, right? So they're the ones overseeing the property manager, making sure they're looking at reports, making sure the scope of work is being hit on, the project staying on time, the project staying on budget, all those things for the entire life of the asset, making sure the mortgage gets paid, making sure insurance, you know, gets shopped every single year, keeping bills down, keeping the expenses down, keeping the income up, and continuously managing the asset and increasing the value of that asset is the asset manager. And it's not just a short-term thing, it is the entire life of the asset. So that one typically gets somewhere closer to 15 to 25% ownership of the overall deal. So if you kind of weigh out all the different portions of the work and any given deal based on the time and the amount of work that goes into it, that's kind of how we carve up the work portion. Then there's the money portion, right? The money is broken down into the actual down payment, right? Who's the one writing the check for the down payment and the operating capital? Who raised that money? Who's sponsoring the loan? And who's managing the capital? So those four are the pillars of the money side of things. What are those worth? Again, depends on the deal and depends on how long their commitment's for. For instance, The equity investor, the private lender who puts the money in, they might only be invested for a year to 60 months, right? 12 to 60 months. It's a year to 5 years. It's a finite amount of time. If you refinance, get them their money back, and they still own equity forever in the asset, it's a pretty smoking deal for them. Earn a fixed return while their money's invested, get all their money back, and then still own equity forever. That's a pretty good deal. So what does that look like? I think it depends on how good of a deal it is. If it's a base hit, obviously you need to give them a little bit more equity to make sure the returns hit the different metrics that they want to receive. If it's more of a home run, then you don't have to give up as much equity because they're still hitting those certain thresholds of a return. That could be anywhere from 10% up to 40 or even 50% equity in the overall deal. Again, depending on how good of a deal it is. Who raised the money? This gets tricky. So you can only pay equity or a fee to people to raise money for you if they're already involved in the deal. This is an SEC regulation. You'll get in a lot of hot water with the SEC if you try to pay somebody who's not involved in the deal for raising money for your deal. So they need to be involved in some other capacity, and if they're involved, if they found the deal, for instance, and they're raising money in the deal, that's totally okay. If they're managing the capital and raising the money, that could probably be okay. If they're sponsoring a loan and raising the money, typically that's okay. You're already involved in the deal and you're a general partner in the deal in some other way, so you can earn a little bit more equity for raising the capital as well. What is that worth? Probably somewhere between 5 to 10% of the overall deal would go to them for raising the capital. The person who manages the capital, probably another 5%-ish, and that's really just making sure quarterly statements go out, making sure quarterly updates go out, making sure quarterly payments go out. A lot of times the person who raises the money can also be the person who manages that capital while it's invested in the deal. And then there's a loan sponsor. The loan sponsor might just be signing on the loan one time, and you're like, how do they get this much equity? And we typically do somewhere between 15 to 25% to the loan sponsor. But they're just signing on the loan, right? They don't have anything to do. Well, it took them years, maybe decades, to build up enough money, cash, to liquidity to qualify for that loan, to build up enough net worth to qualify for that loan, to build up enough experience to qualify for that loan. It's not something that happens overnight, right? It's kind of like, Picasso sitting in a cafe, having a cup of coffee. Some woman comes up to him and says, "Hey, will you draw me a picture?" And he takes a napkin and he draws a picture on the back of it and he hands it to the woman and says, "That's going to be $30,000. She's like, "$30,000, right? But it took you 30 seconds. Well, it took me 30 years to be able to draw that in 30 seconds, which is why it's worth $30,000, right? Very similar for loan sponsors. It took them a long time to build up the liquidity, the net worth, and the experience to be able to qualify to get that loan that's worth $10 million, $20 million, $30 million. Essentially, they're bringing 70 to 80% of all the money to the deal because they're the ones sponsoring the bank loan. The other thing is they're on that loan for the entire life that the loan's in place. So if you get a 30-year mortgage or 30-year amortization schedule on that, guess what? They're financially responsible for the next 30 years that loan's in place. So when you add up, the equity investors, the capital raiser, the capital manager, and the loan sponsor, we typically carve up around 50%. And again, going back to kind of what I mentioned earlier is like, depending on what's going on with the economy, the work could be worth more, kind of like it is today. Right, it's harder to find deals. You had to put more work into the deals in order to make them worthwhile. And the money is abundant right now, so it's maybe worth a little bit less than the work is. But 10 years ago, I remember how it was when it was impossible to raise money and deals were everywhere. So I just try to keep it very fair across the board, realizing that things ebb and flow. And I like to overpay my investors. It's one less thing that I have to worry about as I own the property long term and keep on doing more and more deals. If they just want to keep on recycling their money and re-rolling it into new deals with me, again, it's one less thing. So I'd rather overpay my investors than underpay them and then have to be out there chipping away and having conversations all the time about raising money. I want to just recycle the existing capital that's in our deals and build long-term wealth with long-term partners on the investment side. So although the work is worth a little bit more, we still give a pretty good chunk of the deal to our equity investors. And I think that'll come full circle and stay pretty level, even if the market does shift or everything pivots or the economy goes through the cycles that we know that it always goes through. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. And going back to my initial story of the impetus of this video was, is it reasonable to expect 30% of a deal in perpetuity just to find the deal? The answer is absolutely not reasonable. No, you should expect maybe 2, 3, 4, 5% of the deal, because that's what it's worth, first of all. And secondly, it's your first deal, right? It's not about this deal. It's about getting involved in a deal that's going to set you up for the next 10, 50, 100 deals that you can do because you're involved in this deal. So don't get greedy. Don't be a pig. Understand it's an investment into your future. Be responsible and understand that you're making a long-term investment for your growth in this industry long-term, and be okay with that. The other guy, right? The other guy got a 100-unit portfolio of some sort. He wanted 95% of the deal for finding the deal, overseeing project management, essentially being boots on the ground. Reality is that's probably worth about 25%, not 95% of that deal. There's a lot of other variables that come into play with raising the money, managing the capital, sponsoring the loan, asset management. All that kind of stuff comes into play as well. So that's not worth 95%. It's worth probably 25 to 30% of the overall deal is a more realistic option there. So I hope this puts some things in perspective for you. If you got questions, you got comments, put them in the chat box below. I'd be happy to answer some questions for anything else that might pop up. And if you got some value out of this, please share it, like, subscribe. Would love to, again, hear your comments, and I appreciate you guys. If you got any deals, send them our way. We take them down. We'll either pay you a fee or kick you some equity in the deal long term, maybe joint venture with you if you have that capability, or bring you kind of under our umbrella, link arms with you and start doing some deals together so that way you can get that same amount of experience. So appreciate you guys. Be your best.